Emily?
Yes.
Is it just this?
No, there's one more coming back. This second.
Okay.
We're definitely just talking about Johnson.
this committee of the whole for the City of Highland Park City Council, May 11th, 2026. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Center.
Present.
Councilmember Brockman.
Here.
Councilmember Ross.
Here.
Councilmember Tapia. Councilmember Littleworth.
Here.
Councilmember Bloomberg.
Here.
Mayor Rotary.
Here, we have a quorum. Any objections to Councilmember Tapia joining us from Puerto Vallarta?
All good.
As long as it's a sister city.
Yeah, right. Say hello to our sister city for us, Councilmember Tapia. Okay. Our first item this evening is a discussion regarding the permanent place of remembrance and initial design concepts. I ask before we begin that we take a moment of silence. Thank you. City Manager Newkirk.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. So included in the agenda is a staff report as it pertains to designing for the permanent place of remembrance. Pleased to introduce our team from SWA and All Together that are going to lead the presentation this evening. We have about an hour set aside for the presentation, and we are looking for the council's high-level feedback as it pertains to the design concepts. As you know, certainly we've been meeting as a working group to work with the consultants in planning for a permanent place of remembrance at both the Rose Garden as well as Port Clinton. The working group is led by Mayor Rotary. Councilmember Bloomberg is on that group. We have staff representatives, and I do want to recognize the work of Emily Taub, Assistant City Manager, Amanda Bennett, Communications Manager, Jasmine Alejandro, who's our resiliency specialist, and then the Park District and Representative Gabi from Jocelyn also serves on the working group. Every working group meeting includes minutes, and then we've been sharing the minutes as well as any supplemental information from those working group meetings with the full City Council, just to make sure that everyone is aligned in terms of what actions we've done and what is forthcoming. So this evening, we are presenting design concepts that were presented at the working group public meeting last Thursday. These design concepts are also on our website. And then at this stage, and we've already started to continue with significant public engagement. So very important throughout this entire process is feedback from the next of kin, from victims, and from the general public, both that are in Highland Park as well as outside of Highland Park. So at this time, pleased to introduce our consultant team who will take us through this presentation.
Thank you, appreciate it. Hi, I'm Marisa Schultz. I'm a principal with All Together, and we are leading the engagement and communications for this project. And we have a lot to cover tonight, so have a cup of coffee. And because of that, we want to present all of the concepts and get your feedback. I'm going to go pretty quickly through what we have heard to date and how that has informed the concepts. You'll find a much more robust public engagement summary in your packet and as well as online. So as you know, we have broken up the community and stakeholders into 3 different tiers. That first tier, tier 1, being next of kin, present and injured, first responders, and healthcare workers. The second tier are present, not injured, parade participants, community leadership, resource partners, businesses, volunteers, first responders. And then tier 3 is the general community. So as I talk about feedback, I want you to consider these tiers. And we've given a lot of weight and opportunities to participate to all tiers, but especially tier 1 and to tier 2. What does that look like? So we have been at this for a few months now. In February, we kicked off one-on-one conversations with tier 1. We also had a presentation committee of the whole, a listening session. Small group sessions with tier 1 and 2, where we understood priorities, higher level themes, what they wanted the community to experience, what was important to them when people were visiting this place of remembrance. Went in front of the Historic Preservation Commission for initial consideration, and then we launched a tier 1 and 2 survey that was offered in both English and Spanish, and then a broader community survey that your amazing communications team helped to market out to the public. We then had a community ideation workshop in April, and all of that resulted in quite a bit of input. So for the top tier, that tier 1 survey respondents, we had 22, but we also had a number of tier 1 and tier 2 participate in those listening sessions. And we did that as an opportunity to be able to feel safe and comfortable and participate more in one-on-one or small group format. There were 55 people who participated in those listening sessions and participated in the workshop. So we had about 180 different voices that were participating in some form or fashion. And here's what we heard. Again, I'm going to go through these quickly, but please, if you have any questions at the end of this, you can feel free to ask me. 6 themes really bubbled to the top of all of the conversations that we had. And these themes inform the design concepts that SWA is going to work with you or talk you through tonight. The first being to name the 7 whose lives were taken and acknowledge all who were harmed. This was the most universally held position across all engagement. So that names of those whose lives were taken should appear in the design and given prominence and clearly acknowledged. The second is to honor the people and communities that showed up. Participants across all groups described Highland Park as a community that sheltered and cared for people who were injured, organized mutual aid, and came together to provide support. And really, this is a story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And that was named as one of the very important stories that needed to come through in the design and the various elements of this place of remembrance. Also, this idea of heroism across first responders, healthcare workers, institutions, the city, and staff and communities was also named as something that should be reflected in the design. Your community wants us to tell the story of the full community, not only what happened that day and its impact. What we heard a lot of when we asked participants what they hoped future generations would understand when they were visiting the place of remembrance, their answers were pretty fairly consistent. That the community really cares deeply for one another. They did long before this tragedy and continue to do so well into the future. And several participants framed resilience as a statement around community and relationships, right? That rose above even the tragedy. Another theme was to remember that we need to design for every season. We fortunately or unfortunately live in a cold weather climate, and things are pretty barren during the winter. And so the community wanted life and the experience of life existing throughout all of the seasons. So Ben is going to talk you through that as we go through each of these concepts. To hold space for cultural diversity with intention. The majority of those lives, as you know, who were taken were Latino and or Jewish. And so multiple participants asked that the design honor those specific communities, not as an afterthought, but something that is very intentionally designed around. And we heard lots of ideas around that. Concrete ideas like, certain flowers that were culturally significant in the Mexican community, butterflies and hummingbirds as symbols of transformation, and a place for pilgrimage as is Jewish tradition, also this idea of light. And finally, letting people choose when and whether to engage. This was expressed consistently and deeply felt that it was needed, especially as we think about the 2 different sites for the place of remembrance. That there was a lot of trauma that was experienced that day long after in this community. And so people should be able to have the experience to decide how, when, and how they interact with the sites. So very quickly, I'm going to go through some of the site-specific themes that we heard, and both were different. When we asked the community around what the place should feel like for the Rose Garden, these words came to the top. Natural, private, serene, more of a respite. We heard that the place should include acknowledgement of the 7 lives taken and those injured, very comfortable seating, being allowed to and encouraged to meander throughout the site and being able to sit with your thoughts and process your thoughts. Living plantings with year-round color. A water feature was also discussed and desired by the community, although it was noted those can be pretty expensive and hard to maintain, so we've thought through that. And then clear sight lines throughout. because visibility supports safety and it's an agency for trauma survivors. Also, full ADA accessibility above and beyond, making sure that anyone of any ability can be able to access the site and move throughout it. For Port Clinton Plaza, the words that we heard were dynamic, layered, vibrant, welcoming, resilient. The space, we heard, should acknowledge that the shooting happened here, honoring the lives taken while also affirming the lives that continue. We also heard that this is a very everyday, vibrant, active space for the community. It's where events are held. And so this idea of introducing plants and natural elements to kind of soften more of the brick-heavy plaza was important, as well as thinking about that idea of choosing when and how to participate, especially because there are so many businesses and families that are using the plaza every day. We also asked about the connections between the sites. Do we want an actual literal path connecting the two? And what we heard the community say is what we would prefer are actual symbolism that represent both of the sites, elements that continue through either with design or pieces at different scales so that the two feel related but don't necessarily need to be physically connected. And finally, we showed mood boards. It's really hard for the community, I think, to think through design and what exactly they want to see. And so we gave them some options to weigh in around different elements and themes for the concepts. The first was movement direction. So you see here, you go from more informal to formal, and the community, both the tier 1, tier 2 workshop, and those listening discussions really led towards option 2, which are more curved paths, spirals, a more flowing layout, plantings that move a visitor through the sense of place, and no large solid walls. For material directions, kind of came more to that soft, natural, and defined options. So that to us signals more organic elements that age gracefully and signal care. Accessibility is the primary driver when we're selecting materials, making sure that people can use and access the site, and seasonal plant material. For color directions, the community was a bit more split. I think more veered towards option 2, where there are pieces of color, right? Not too vibrant, but there are opportunities for pops of color that feel seasonal and feel right. So that could be a more of a naturalistic palette that includes some vibrant colors, or even thinking about how we might be able to introduce colors through a kaleidoscope or reflected light. And then night present directions. And what was interesting about this, right? One is much more of that softer ambient lighting, to the third being much more present, dynamic and sculptural. We heard that the community wanted to see lighting in 2 different ways in both of the sites. For the Rose Garden, at night, it's softer and more atmospheric. And I think that that points back to that more of that serene, calmer experience. And for Port Clinton at night, we can get a little bit more creative and bolder and expressive and experiential use of light. You already have light there for the holiday program and throughout the year, and so being able to add to that as an element was something the community was interested in. In natural directions, right, this more organic and free form based on more formal and cultivated, the community again leaned more towards that organic and flowing, but not too wild, right? Showing care and intent in a lot of the vegetation and the way that it's maintained. And then when we think about memory, how do we want to honor those lives who were taken, those lives that were injured, and the community as a whole? There was a bit of a split in terms of more ambient, so you're experiencing it in a bit of a more softer way, to more dynamic or sculptural. And so we look at leaning more towards the second, where we keep the 7, acknowledge the names of the 7 victims whose lives were taken, keep this idea of the number 7 as a recurring motif and abstract elements as an alternative to literal memorial forms. So with that, I want you to think about all of those themes and everything I just walked you through. I'm going to turn it over to Ben, and he's got 3 concepts that you also have printed in front of you.
Thanks, Marisa.
Yeah, thank you all.
Does this control the slide deck?
Do that.
Yes.
There was a piece that was on slide 16 that wasn't read but out loud, but about honoring what's already in the Rose Garden as well.
Mhm.
It wasn't said out loud, so I'm saying it out loud. It was on the
Yeah.
sheet.
Yeah, thank you. We're trying to go quickly because we know there's more on the agenda. So this presentation begins with existing conditions analysis. I'm going to sort of acknowledge what we looked at, but not really go into depth on it. We can come back to that as sort of an appendix if there's questions about existing conditions. But in the interest of time, I'm going to really focus on the design concepts. Thank you, Marisa, for walking us through the engagement. It's really a helpful precursor to this. So, where are we in the process? We're sort of starting phase 2 engagement with the unveiling of these concept designs, and we're moving towards council meeting on June 8th, where we're hoping to have sort of a single refined concept at that point for you all to look at. So things are moving quickly. Things have been moving quickly. We've been doing quite a lot in the last few weeks. And then moving forward, we're looking at Historic Preservation Commission in late June, and then moving into design development, construction documentation in summer and fall, with bidding and construction in 2027. So as Geeta mentioned, we're really hoping for high-level feedback. You know, we've been working on these schemes for about 3 weeks, so we have not had time to get into a great level of detail. I think ideas about detail are welcome, but just want to preface what you're looking at with, you know, the reality that we've been looking at these at kind of a site conceptual level at this point. And so feedback in that area is very productive for us at this point. So existing conditions, as I said, I'm just going to kind of breeze through this. We looked at context and screening for the site. We looked at current and existing site access. We looked at the existing trees based on the arborist report provided by the City of Highland Park, and where sort of the most kind of valuable trees are versus where there are trees that are, you know, maybe less valuable. The area, I will pause on this for a moment, the area highlighted in orange, that's where we see probably the most trees being removed to kind of create space for the place of remembrance. But the vast majority of trees in that area are either invasive or are, you know, very young, not mature trees. So this is not going to have a high impact on the canopy on the site. We're doing a lot of work with these concepts to preserve existing, mature, native and well-adapted tree canopy that's not part of the kind of invasive canopy. Historic resources, very appreciative to all the work that the staff with the Historic Preservation team or the Historic Preservation Commission has done to kind of connect us with resources about the history of the site, and so that's obviously a big piece of what we've taken into consideration in our design here. So the preliminary concept designs, we have 3 different approaches, and you know, in thinking about this, we took great care to think of this as a place. You made a conscious decision to call this a place of remembrance, not a memorial. And so what is a place? A place is something that we have imbued with meaning. It's not just space, it's not just designed objects. It's something that people interact with and bring things to. So our approach is grounded in this knowledge and our experience thus far working with your community, that people really care here, that it's a community with active participation. And our hope is that the place of remembrance will not be just a static marker of what was lost here, but it's something that will be grown into over time through the actions of your community, through the participation of your community. That's a word that is eluding me today. We also were very much grounded in these core concepts that Marisa already went through, naming the 7, acknowledging all those who were harmed, honoring the people in the communities that showed up telling the full story of the community, not only what happened, designing for remembrance in every season, and letting people choose when and whether to engage. So with that, we had three kind of overarching ideas for beginning with the Rose Garden site. We'll look through the three Rose Garden concepts and then move over to Port Clinton. The first, woven together, takes the ideas that I mentioned in the previous two slides and honors the 7 individuals by allowing for intimate gatherings and diverse approaches to honoring the deceased. There's 7 individual spaces, and they're woven together by the grounding of nature, water, and the act of walking. The second, Mending Lines, features gentle arcs that act as storylines, acknowledging the trauma experienced by Highland Park, but also the resilience that it revealed. And it gives visitors the opportunity to reflect on that ongoing story through intentional action. The third concept features 7 sculptural rose petals, which are set into a naturalistic field in a simple, formal frame that pay homage to the beauty of Highland Park and the surrounding geography, and visitors are rewarded in this concept by showing up time and time again. So in greater detail, here are the 3 concept plans, next side by side. We'll begin with the first woven together into a walkthrough of the site. So this image gives kind of an overview of what the kind of core of the space would feel like. This naturalistic garden is framed by 7 remembrance niches and is tied together again with a gently meandering path and a through line of water that connects through the space. You can see that the primary kind of intervention of the place of remembrance is sort of the back 2/3 of the site, but we've provided a prominent accessible path entering the site from St. John's. We also looked at having potentially an accessible route connecting to the City Hall frontage, knowing that the closest public parking lot is on the other side of City Hall on Hazel. The sort of first moment you experience at the place of remembrance is a entry sign within a grove of aspen with lush understory planting. This acts as kind of a palate cleanse or something to sort of act as a threshold between the city outside of the place of remembrance and the space within. You move into a central circle, we're calling it a council ring in honor of Jens Jensen. This has the same dimensions as the existing central rose garden feature. This area contains several walls that would tell story about the experience of the community, would honor first responders, it would acknowledge those who were injured, and it features circular seating for people to gather. The space is really about kind of embracing community. You also see a water feature that's in the space of the original water feature in the Rose Garden that runs through the site that originates in this space. From there, visitors can walk into a quieter reflection garden that is really dedicated to the 7 individuals lost. So this space features 2 paths, one that meanders more tightly back and forth across the water feature, and another that sort of spreads out back and forth between 2 formal alleys of trees. Within those trees are 7 niches, and you'll see images of what those spaces feel like. But each of those would be dedicated to one of the individuals lost, and eventually visitors come to a reflection niche at the back of the space where the water feature ends. So you cross over this water feature 7 times, and each time you do, you head into a new reflection niche. The kind of garden texture in the center is, would be this sort of naturalistic planting, not wild, but curated, and then framed again by a more formal setting of trees. You can see diagrams studying the circulation and kind of where the specific programmatic elements are within the space. I won't spend too much time on these. Get to the walkthrough. So this is sort of an overview looking from St. John's. You can see how the place of remembrance fits within the existing context. We've, again, done a lot of work to make sure that the existing mature oak trees at the front of the site will not be impacted by any of these design interventions. This is that threshold space, this kind of entry grove. So lush understory planting, aspen trees, which we chose specifically because they are appropriate for a site like this, kind of in a riparian area, but also because they are very resilient trees that grow in communities. So there's some symbolism there too. Moving into the council ring space, you can see walls featuring narrative and text, a circular seating element, and the water feature in the center that runs through the space. And you can see how the planting, which kind of weaves in and out, makes it so there's not a really like confrontational view between one end of the space and the other that helps create some sort of privacy within the space. The rose garden itself, we have sort of taken away the existing footpaths while maintaining a connection between, an informal connection between City Hall and the library site. And what we imagine here is a sort of wildflower meadow that might feature wild roses that would hold up better to deer pressure. And, you know, the existing roses, we're very conscious that for much of the year, to keep them happy, they have to be pruned and look like kind of thorny sticks, which is visually perhaps not appropriate for a setting like this. It's a fairly stark visual element. We do want to keep a number of the existing yew hedges within the space. Those are really, you know, great old hedge species that sort of allude to the structure that previously existed in the rose garden. And there's also symbolism there in that yew hedges are believed to be sort of symbols of eternity or protectors of the deceased. So it creates this nice symbolism in that threshold as well. Within the remembrance niches, so these are the spaces where the individual victims are named, there's sort of a sculptural bench element scaled for a small group or a family to gather together and honor their loved one, and a sort of sculptural stone element that would have a reflective surface or perhaps be able to hold water that would also reflect the sky above, that would have the name of the victim inscribed in it. And this is sort of an open-ended piece that, you know, people can leave flowers on, they can leave candles on. It sort of suggests a table that you gather around. It invites smaller groups to be in community with one another, honoring this person that they lost. And then finally, the reflection niche at the back of the space, looking out across. This is slightly bigger than the niches for the 7 individuals. And it's kind of a moment to just pause, feel the impact of the water kind of running towards you, and then set back off through the space as you head back towards the council ring in the middle. Materials, very high level. This is something that we'll be getting into much more as we develop the designs, but limestone, rock, calcareous brick, which features lime, so it relates to the stone itself, thermally modified wood, etched concrete for you know, primary accessible paths, something with some amount of aggregate exposed so it feels more natural without kind of having the rougher surface of stone pavers, ensuring that the basin of water features has, you know, stone or intentional surfacing within it, so that in the winter when water is not running, it feels still like it has a presence, like it's still intentional and not just dormant. And then split polished stone, again for these memorial features, the table elements within the niches. Plant material also very high level at this point, but we've looked at perhaps an Armstrong gold maple for the vertical trees framing the garden, quaking aspen, again preserving the yew within the space, perennial grasses and flowers, and specifically focusing on butterfly attractors, which may have you know, cultural meaning for the Latino families impacted by the tragedy. The second concept, mending lines. So this is a more flowing, less formal garden, sort of a meditative process that follows these 3 arcs. You can see in this design, the place of remembrance comes more prominently all the way out to St. John's Ave, but the informality of it makes it feel sort of like a garden at that moment rather than, a formal memorial space. The first arc is really about welcome. It's about sort of starting to tell the story of what happened. And then that pivots into a second arc that, again, finds its way into a circular space, preserving the dimension of the existing rose garden central area. And similar program imagined for that, acknowledging kind of the community, the resilience of this community, telling the story of how first responders and citizens within the community showed up, telling the story of how this impacted people who were injured and continue to live with that. You can see we also keep some of the U topiary aligned with City Hall here. From that space, there is what we call the reflection arc, and the idea is that you can take a stone from the existing ring that's used as a rock garden within the rose garden and carry that to a reflecting pool at the back of the space. This is sort of an act of pilgrimage, so again, sort of trying to take inspiration from the cultures that were impacted by this tragedy, both in the Jewish faith, carrying a stone is very important, but also in the Catholic tradition, taking a pilgrimage is very important. So creating an intentional action for visitors to participate in that acts as sort of a grounding moment in meditation. Again, diagrams, I will not spend too long on these, but we've explored sort of the broader circulation. This site's a little bit looser with these, clear directives of where you're going, but with kind of a space floating around that. So from St. John's Avenue, this would be sort of the welcome area here. You'll see throughout the space, we're using natural stone as kind of informal seating, and then more formalized seating that uses wood as a more kind of comforting material in the circular spaces. We also took care to leave some of the existing lawn picnic ground open so that families can gather and honor their loved ones in a way that feels appropriate for them. The council ring space, so in this concept, the circular bench is not centered in the space, it's all the way around the outside of the space. But again, we have walls that would have narrative text within the space, and you can see we've left the circular ring with stones in the middle, and would invite visitors to take a stone and carry it further into the space to the pool at the end. From City Hall, you can see, again, we've left some of the yew hedges to preserve that visual structure of the rose garden. And we intentionally kept the view shed open here between these important civic spaces of City Hall, this kind of community-oriented space within the place of remembrance, and the library beyond. We felt that keeping that sightline open was important symbolism. This is the sort of reflection arc. So if you imagine you're carrying a stone with you at this point, and kind of really focused on the 7 victims. And the reflecting pool at the end of the space, where we would have the names of the victims inscribed around the outside. And we imagine that 7 stones, they would be nicer looking stones than what we pulled from our rendering software. Apologize for that, but 7 sort of sculptural stones that emerge out of the water. The stones themselves would not have names of the victims, they'd be sort of abstracted in that sense, but the number would be there symbolically. And the idea here is that you could drop a stone in this pool, you would see the ripples move outward, and that kind of carries through the paving as well. So sort of encouraging people to reflect deeply through kind of an intentional action. Similar material choices here. I think a sort of different expression of stone within the water, a little bit more naturalistic potentially. And then with planting here, really leaning on the quaking aspen to create a sense of almost moving through kind of a riverbed as you go through the space, and then crafting a lush understory within that. Out towards the sunnier end of the site by St. John, we'd again lean on perennial grasses and flowers, butterfly attractors. Okay, the final rose garden concept, petals. So in this concept, we have a simple meadow that's host to 7 sculptural objects, evocative of rose petals. The petals are, in this concept, the idea is that they act as kind of a constant amidst a field of change, the dynamics of seasonality around them. And you can see we've created this stone wall around the space, and again, a ring of formal trees. So we're sort of framing the movement of seasons and highlighting that with these 7 sculptural objects that would be likely a metal element, so they would kind of contrast against the texture of the natural plant material. This is the simplest site plan in a way. Again, just kind of a loop, also sort of in the shape of a rose petal. Within the site, you can see we don't preserve the footprint of the rose garden. In this concept, the idea was to honor that history through kind of conceptual means with this introduction of sculpture inspired by roses. So it's really sort of a two entry paths through the lawn off St. John's, a kind of overlook looking down into the field as you enter the place of remembrance, and then a loop framed by this stone wall. The end of the space is a long wall looking back, be west across the space, and that would have the names of the victims. Similar to the rocks in the pool in the previous concept, the actual rose petal sculptures would not have victims' names on them. They would be sort of abstractly representative of the 7. And then the idea also with this wall surrounding the space is that there would be formal seating elements sort of built into it, or just the ability to sit along the wall. So you can kind of walk as many times around this loop, choose a place to sit wherever you like. And in regards to the historic sort of infrastructure of the site, you can see that this intervention does not go as far back into the site, so we're able to keep some of the existing stone walls in the rear space. Circulation, again, fairly straightforward on this, but it's worth noting that we did explore potentially having an ADA connection to the staff lot, knowing that there might be a number of people visiting this space who are wheelchair users or have mobility challenges, and that's the most kind of direct route to any parking nearby. So coming off of St. John's, very simple path, again, trying to avoid critical root zone for the oak trees. And a hedge sort of screening the entry to create privacy. And then a welcome wall which would host, there we go. So this welcome wall would have text, narrative text about, again, first responders, about those present and injured, about the overall resilience of this community in face of this tragedy. And that looks out over this meadow, something to take in before you start strolling. You can see the rose petal objects kind of floating more close up here. The idea is that these would be above, kind of just above where perennial plants will grow up to in summer, so they kind of keep on floating above that throughout the season. But you see that sort of planting change around it throughout the year, as you're rewarded by kind of coming back again and again to this site. This is the end of the space where we have the long, low wall with the names of the victims inscribed, and a more formalized seating element that looks back over the space. And we've also incorporated a low deck or bridge element that allows some of the landscape to kind of pass through, suggesting a connection to the creek and the broader geography beyond. And again, just taking in that idea that this space is a loop, so visitors could take sort of as much time to walk around it as they need. It's not a there and back. It's a space you can kind of do a meditative walk around, 3-4 times, however many you wish. Similar material thoughts, although this concept introduces the idea of formed metal, potentially an anodized steel, probably not something painted, but something where the color in the steel is actually coming from, a more chemical process, won't chip. And similar planting strategy to the first scheme we looked at.
I'm gonna stop you.
Yeah.
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 Let's do rose garden
Yeah.
conversation first.
Let's go.
And I just wanna thank you, Ben, and thank Marisa, and thank SWA, and all together, for the thought and analysis that's gone into all of these design ideas, the creativity, the efforts to really speak to the broad range of opinions that cover what we're trying to achieve here. And, the words reflection and remembrance and respite and solace seem to really have been sort of underscoring each of these designs as different as they are. So just wanted to share our appreciation. Tony and I have seen these previously in the Place of Remembrance Working Group meeting, but I just want to share a couple of thoughts that I shared at that meeting as well with my council colleagues. And I just have to say that I lean towards one for a whole host of reasons. I like the variety of reflection options. I like how it reflects the 7 unique individuals lost. So it's a group of 7 people who were together, but 7 individuals. I like the aspen trees at the entrance because of the sound of the leaves, because of the beauty of the colors changing, because of the beauty of the trees in the wintertime. And I don't know if you quite caught what Ben said, but they tend to sprout new trees around them. So that's a kind of continuity of community and a continuation of community that the aspen trees bring. So to me, I feel like that really captures a lot of what we've been trying to achieve. And not to diminish all the work that went into 2 or 3, but to me 2 seems almost too much hardscape. And I'm just concerned, I appreciate the thought behind the rock movement. It seems almost a little too cute to me, and I worry that kids will be like, let's just go throw rocks, which is not at all respectful of what we're trying to achieve. Number 3 almost seems a little too barren. And as I mentioned at our last meeting, I worry about kids getting beamed on the noggin running through there with metal pedals, and I understand they might be higher or lower, but to me, again, that just feels difficult in terms of what we're trying to achieve with the respectfulness and the solemnity of why people are coming here. But that's one person's opinion out of 7. Tony, I don't know if you want to weigh in, and then I'll open it up to everybody else.
I don't have too much more to add. I think I shared similar responses to this. The use, there was one suggestion at one point of being able to drop stones in the water and creating ripples. And I think there's a maintenance issue or a longevity issue with somebody having to take the rocks out, put them back for further use. The Jewish symbolism of taking rocks and placing them is a very strong one, but for me, and I didn't express this before, is more associated with a place of remembrance or a grave site. It isn't necessarily so. There are circumstances where we do that, but it's more of a memorial rather than this kind of concept that we're shooting for here. I like the entry ways to both 1 and 2 because it creates a separation from the outside world, a separation from St. John's that I think creates a sense of being able to contemplate whatever it is that you want to think about and have a place of remembrance for the things that we've talked about. My preference tends to be for the first one because it allows for a greater opportunity for separation of individuals who are visiting, a lot of opportunity to walk. I think walking is somewhat therapeutic and somewhat reminiscent of the circumstances when this terrible thing happened. And I think that's an important element as well.
Thanks. Annette?
So I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Number 1 is really just about concept 3, which I'm not crazy about, but I was wondering, what is the size and the height of those roses?
The petals?
The petals, I'm sorry, thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. In terms of height off the ground, we imagined maybe in the 5 to 8 feet off the ground range. These would, the intention would be that this field would not have foot traffic through it because it would be grown with dense plant material, right? But that height is based on what a lot of native perennials to this area will grow to sort of at the peak of summer.
So you could literally have prairie and then the rose
Yeah.
petals kind of
Floating above that.
Floating above that.
Yeah, in terms of the actual size, I think, it's an irregular shape, but maybe 2 to 3 feet, big enough to I think we'd want to test that out a little bit further to just make sure that they.
How it withstands wind and,
Right.
I don't want someone getting bonked or,
That was my, or
It's
having
just-
ice form in it and whatever,
Right.
so, yeah.
So I have some problems with that, but I just wanted to make sure I understood at least what it is. Additionally, I love the idea of the 7 individual and that to me, it's really about respite and quiet, and I think it affords the families and those close to each individual their own kind of privacy.
Mhm.
So I really like the idea of 1. The problem I have, and maybe it just hasn't been addressed yet with any of these, is this is a landmark, and there are other architects and gardeners who, from a former time, were honored here and memorialized, not memorialized, but I don't want to lose that landmark essence also. I don't mind if it's in a different part of a garden, but I don't see the thread in any of these that ties it to the history that we as a group and the Historic Preservation Commission agreed that we wanted to maintain. And again, I know this is preliminary, so if you're asking purely about the remembrance and one portion, I'm this looks amazing, but I just want to make sure that that's incorporated in. I want to go on the record as saying that, because I think that's a key component that we as a group wanted to make sure we worked through.
I can kind of answer that, at least my interpretation. Ben, stop me if I'm going sideways. But the council ring in the middle is where there's currently the circle in the middle of the rose garden and reflects back on Jens Jensen. The materials that are being recommended are also very much Jensen-esque in terms of the composition of the stone and so forth. If you look at the lobes, so to speak, of the woven together, that actually, if you look at the plans from the rose garden, is almost like a 90-degree flip of
Okay.
what was brought in. And there was a reference to using native roses, not the ones that got chopped that Egan came up with. That never really became anything in that rose garden. So it almost becomes more so of what it is, because if
What
you
it was
think
supposed to be.
what it was supposed to be, because if
Okay.
you think about it, it has that council circle, it has those Jensen materials, it has the roses, and it has the wildflowers. So each of the different components that were brought in for Jessie Lowe Smith and for Jens Jensen and for Egan are still there.
Okay,
So I want to assure you that
concept.
that
and-
concept, those historical pieces
Uh-huh.
are absolutely referenced in the design.
I think that sums it up well. I guess I would
Okay.
also just say that there's sort of an unfortunate irony in the Jesse Lowe Smith and Jens Jensen portions of the garden, that these are two people who care deeply about the natural environment and native plant materials, and they're just dominated by invasive species right now.
Oh,
And
good,
so,
we're gonna
Right.
clean it up.
yeah,
That's
part of the
great.
intent of this is definitely to create a sort of thriving ecology within the space that would honor the legacy of those individuals.
Great, that's very helpful. So
Yeah.
my last 2 points are very simple, and that's agreement with the mayor about the stones and with Councilmember Bloomberg. In the Jewish faith, I mean, it's not about stones and water, it's about stones at graveyards.
Yeah.
And I do think there's a risk with the community, because the last thing we want to do is tell people how to spend their time here and how they should pay their respects or come and have some meditative time. And so I think that to open it up to sort of throwing stones in a pond or whatever, it could be problematic, both in terms of what happens and maintenance, and I don't want to be policing it in any way. I mean, I think this should be where people come and reflect, but I don't want to open it up in that way, because it's disrespectful, actually, to that type of custom, at least within the Jewish religion. So I completely agree with you. The last thing I just wanted to say is I'm quite partial to the aspen. I think it's a tree that will really do well all year round, and that I think will really be a theme. And so to respect the seasonality and the longevity and the way it reproduces also, Mayor, I think that's exactly on point if you understand aspens. So I'm thrilled with that aspect of it.
Thanks. Marissa?
So first of all, I think all three of them are like incredible and great work. I was leaning towards 1 and part of 2, like there's components of 2 that I do like. I like the hardscape look too, and more of the open, like when you first walk into this, it's more open for families to kind of do what they want. And so that's why I'm kind of torn between 1 and 2. I agree though with the stones, that portion of it, I'm not, I see not being, adding anything. And in fact, it could be a distraction, especially as I think of families and children going in. So I mean, I think would be happy with 1 or 2. Like I said, there's just a few components of 2 that I like the hardscape. I like the look of it. It's a little bit more open, so that's kind of what I like with 2. But
A little bit more free,
yes,
free flowing.
I like that. But I mean, 1 is also, there's lots of elements I like with 1 as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yumi and then John.
Just gonna write some, make it a little more coherent. but,
I'll go back- I
one-
can go to John if that's-
I might as well start.
Okay.
I guess I would have preferred, but we haven't done that, but there's gotta be some connection to Port Clinton Square, so I would have preferred flowing into that and hearing what that connection is, but, before we started talking about this, because to me that's a little disconnect, but, I, to the point about honoring the people we were honoring, we were supposed to be currently honoring in the Rose Garden, I assume there would be some text or something beyond just the plant material that is there, because I doubt that many people are gonna make that connection without being told that. But the other question I have is, it would have been helpful to see what this, since this is a rendering, this is not what we were actually looking at, a rendering as well of what it would look like during the winter. What the plants are gonna look like during the winter, because we showed a lot of flowering plants, and I think that since the majority of the time, things aren't going to be blooming. It would be helpful to see that. Regarding the petals, I just want to mention that I think that rather than, if you were to use petals rather than, petals that seem like they've fallen from a tree, somehow have them not be horizontal but more vertical. I do definitely appreciate in the first one the opportunity, and having had a chance to talk to somebody who's directly affected, who was related to one of the victims. It sounds like at least one perspective is that it would be very nice to have that personal moment. I want to add, I did raise the issue of when we talked about the water elements, that it during the winter you can't have it, but running. But at the same time, I do like this idea of the sound of water. To me, the water's that's the most beautiful part, is just hearing water running. And I wondered if there was an opportunity, if in some manner, and I'm just putting it out there, that I hope that this wouldn't be nixed immediately, but rather just percolate somewhere, that if we have these, in any way or individually honoring, 7 victims, that it take on, if at all possible, if it's a piece of stone or metal or whatever, that it somehow we work with the families, that it might reflect a little of their personality or something very subtle that speaks to who they were, that it might be a nice nod to the families. And I can't say, I think that conceptually I do like those opportunities to reflect on a single one of the 7 victims in number 1, but I think there are opportunities in all of them. I think there are opportunities in all of them, and I wondered if this is just throwing something out there, have you ever considered a Zen garden kind of aspect to it?
Mm-hmm.
And just because that would be seasonless, free of seasons, and I think that is it. That's all I can think of right now.
Okay, thanks. John?
Thank you. And I don't want to forget about Councilmember Tapia as well as on the phone.
I'm on it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ben, I wish I had your vocabulary. Oh my God, the way you described things is remarkable. When I first kind of flipped through these, I thought all 3 of them really looked interesting, and then hearing you describe, go through each one of them, it was abundantly clear that number 1 captures everything that we're talking about. I think there's significant purpose, there's the symbolism, it's reflective. I heard you use words like community, it's welcoming, you've paid homage appropriately to the historic nature that we're going for in terms of the previous purpose. I think it incorporates the natural elements beautifully. I really think it provides for optionality for visitors to either walk and or sit and reflect, and I think that's really important to give people that choice. It just feels very Highland Park, right? It's engulfed in nature. I find 2 to be pretty sterile. And I spent some commentary on 3 as well. I don't even need to talk about it. So I think you and your team did a really, really nice job in capturing everything that was provided to you in the form of feedback there. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Andres? Councilmember Tapia? It's still lit up?
You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Now.
Thank you.
Okay, yes. I have a question and then I have a comment. So what is the scale of all three? How do they benchmark against the scale of other comparable, places of remembrance that you all are working on?
Great question, Councilmember Tapias. I think it's interesting because this site doesn't have its own dedicated parking feature either, so it's really kind of set within this civic context that's close around it. I think the scale of the actual space is quite comparable to other such spaces we've worked on, but the scale of intervention is smaller because there's not a broader site infrastructure or approach. It's kind of, and it feels maybe more condensed because you have the library right there, you have the city hall right there, and I didn't, for the sake of time, spend a ton of time speaking to the specifics of screening, but all three of these schemes, because of that context, try to kind of screen to some degree the sites around it. This is sort of a counterintuitive concept in garden design, but smaller spaces feel bigger when they're more condensed. When you don't make a small space feel really wide open, if you walk into a space and you feel like I can see everything all at once, and it is small, it feels small. So we tried to work with the third concept. You do sort of take in the view all at once, but that one view is a little bit bigger in that space. So that's the one where we allowed the space to be kind of taken in one go. And in the first two, certainly, the space sort of reveals itself as you move through it, so it will feel larger as a result.
Okay, so thank you for that. I thought that would just be a somewhat of a thing to keep in mind. I worry about the space looking too big or too tight, right? And it seems like you've taken that into account as think about it. But I think as you refine it, I would just want to be mindful of that. Because, it's a different kind of green space, right? Because, if it were a park for just no remembrance, it's a park, you want wide open spaces, you want that kind of feel. There's a sense of you want some privacy and not so claustrophobic. So it's a little tricky thing, so I just wanted to put that out there that as the design gets tighter, and be more specific to really, I just want to keep bringing up what the space is going to feel like if it's too open or too tight. So that's one comment. The other is, in terms of three, I do lean more toward option one, because my colleagues here, I would agree that the ability to just families and friends and others to remember each of the seven in a very particular way, however way you want to do it, and with some little bit of privacy, that felt really appropriate. And I like that, even with that, there's a common area at the front, so you're doing kind of two things to do. And it's the only concept where I heard you present, taking into account the requirement that we address the diversity of our community, the diversity of the victims. And this is the only one that really creates space that is both about the unity of the community, but also the fact that we have differences. So I think that is a plus for one that the others did not seem to have. The one concern I have about concept one, if I heard your narrative right about people walking, I like the fact that family members and friends could gather around and sit by their loved ones' remembrance. But then what happens to the flow of traffic of people who are just walking through? Are they going to walk right between where they're sitting and where the remembrance is, the reflective pool, the small reflective pool that you're thinking of? And if I saw that right, I would be worried about that, because then what's supposed to be a private moment is just going to be interrupted by people walking through. So I would, do I have that right?
It's really important point you bring up, and I addressed this on Thursday, but I sort of skipped over it in the interest of time today. But we did think about that very issue specifically with this concept, and that is partly why we have this path running down the center, so that if you notice that one of these niches is already in use, you could just skip one sort of lobe of the weave and keep moving through the space.
Keep walking straight.
Yeah.
Instead of over to the individual.
At any moment along that woven path, you will have the opportunity before you enter the next niche to diverge and sort of skip over a space to allow people their privacy.
Yeah, and so, okay, and just something to think about. I wonder if people can get closer to rather than skipping the whole person's remembrance, is there like a more private pathway for those that want to gather, and then one that's a little bit more public, like behind it or something, right? They made two paths, one in the front and one in the back of it. And the one in the front is more where the people sit, and then the one behind it is where you can walk by and still go participate. So I don't know. I don't want to problem solve for you, but I don't like the idea of, well, we'll just skip it. You know, then it's like, oh, that's a joy. And you don't want to hurry up the people doing something private and feeling that they're in the way or something, right? If you're going to be private, you want to be there as long as you want to be and not feel like you hold people up, and you don't feel. And if you went to honor all 7 and then you only honored 5 of them, it just feels like an incomplete experience. I just wanted to surface that as a dilemma there.
I think that's a really valid point. And to your first question about the scale of the space, there is a reason why only one of these schemes had 7 individual spaces, and that is because the context around the edges of this site is very uneven. And we had to work with ways to sort of create a frame within the site so it felt like each of these spaces was equal and not like, oh, one person has this really nice space over by the library and this other person has a space by the trash enclosure. Right? So there are sort of geometric limitations to the site that I will say we iterated on that particular issue quite a lot, and this was kind of the neatest solution we found in the time that we had, but I think it is something that's worth exploring further, of like how do you kind of keep the flow. I think it's also possible that we could introduce the names of the 7 victims, you know, all together in one place. Maybe that's at the end of the site, so that you don't have that feeling of having skipped anything. We obviously don't want to have anyone feel rushed or like they're only getting a partial experience. But that's sort of, that is, I mean, you're naming a real challenge to that approach. We're not working with kind of an endless open field here. So how do we, and we also, I will say, wanted to maintain enough space between those niches that they felt private from each other too, right? So it's like kind of how far can you stretch out, but how close together can you be? And that's something that we can continue to test and play with, certainly as things evolve.
Got it. Okay, and then the final quick thing is, I think Councilmember Ross is just asking about more of a Zen garden and recent parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very worried about the seasonality and the short, lush vegetation seasons that we have, and we want this to look really attractive and meaningful throughout the year. So that's what I have.
Thank you.
We need to also talk about Port Clinton Square. Are you okay if we hold your comments, or
Are we going back to it then? 'Cause
to this, to the
Yeah.
Rose Garden?
no, yeah, because
So Tony had his hand up first, so if we could keep it super brief, because
Yes.
Yeah,
I want us to get through the conversation.
Totally.
Thank you.
Very briefly, I noticed when you were showing the walking paths that are highlighted in sort of a fuchsia color, one thing I suspect was intentional that I like regarding the first plan, there it is. the entrance goes around the outside of the seating area of the council ring.
Yeah.
And there isn't an opening directly at the back of that council ring to feed you down the center of the 7 rows. So it takes people out of interfering with people who are sitting at the council ring, and it takes people out of whomever is enjoying what part of the rest of the place of remembrance, and allows the circulation element to be a separate element from being involved in the place of remembrance. It looks intentional to me that the entryway and exitway
It
in
was
that council
intentional, yeah.
ring
That it's not
is
just
offset.
symmetrical.
It's not right.
Yeah.
Right.
Straight line.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Amy?
Thank you, Mayor. Very quickly, I'm not sure, just putting it on all of our radar, how we would choose, since it is in somewhat linear in that you're going from front to back, with, you know, how you would choose, you know, which of, you know, the victims is, you know.
Oh, what order?
What
in
order,
what
I
order
talked
they're
about
arranged.
that.
I don't
Right.
know,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't, you know, I certainly want to work with the victims' families to make sure that they're comfortable with the order. And then, again, at some point, if you could talk about your vision for what it's gonna look like in wintertime,
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
would be helpful.
We fully intend to, you know, develop more renderings of that aspect of it, but, you know, I hope you all appreciate that in 3 weeks' time, we
And
were.
I have to say, I do appreciate, I should have led with this, I do appreciate the time, the complexity, the challenges
Yeah.
of what you have embarked on, and I thank you for, you know, that work.
And I'll also say that as a Minnesotan.
I was gonna say, as a Minnesotan,
I
you are
understand
very
that winter
cognizant.
is real, and I think about how to make gardens beautiful in winter all the time. because
Wonderful, wonderful.
There's a lot of our year there.
Thank
as it
you.
is here. Shall I go on to Port Clinton?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so three concepts for Port Clinton. These each relate back to the Rose Garden sites. We did give a different name to the second concept because it's sort of linked through the idea of kind of interaction with the space rather than something aesthetic or formal. The first concept, so you'll recall that there's sort of 7 trees that are kind of taken out of the trees framing the space to make space for these remembrance niches. The idea here is that those 7 trees actually end up in Port Clinton. The 12 trees that are there today are, I think about 70% of them are in poor health, according to the arborist. And locust trees are sort of a problematic choice for an on-structure condition because they really like to spread their roots out in, you know, almost like a lawn type condition. So we would choose something that will do well. I think the upright maple, for instance, or an upright oak would do well in an on-structured condition. They're compact trees. They don't need to spread their roots out. And so that would then be kind of an opportunity for lighting those trees, making them feel significant. And then there would be likely, you know, perhaps a metal object that has names of the victims inscribed in it within the space as well. The second concept features something like almost like a post office box, but more of like an art or sculpture object that people can interact with by sort of sending letters to their loved ones. Their letters are never read, but you're kind of putting them into this black box, essentially, taking again the time, the intention to sort of participate and interact with the space. And then the final concept, petals, sees sort of an 8th one of these rose petal sculptures end up in Port Clinton with a sort of bench element to sit and reflect with that. Looking a little bit more closely at these, on all of these, I'll also say we really wanted to avoid doing too much to disturb the existing paving. Like sort of technical reality of this site being on structure is that as soon as you start changing the ground plane in any significant way, you may have to re-waterproof, and from a cost standpoint, that could be a real black hole. that could end up being much more of the budget than anybody, you know, if you end up going back to the community and saying we spent a quarter of our budget on re-waterproofing Port Clinton,
Because
and
we
nobody's
don't
ever
know
gonna
who-
experience that, right? So we wanna be cognizant of that reality. So all of these try to take sort of a light touch structurally, while having kind of conceptual symbolism to them that resonates for this site, but also with the Rose Garden. So this is what the 7 trees feel like. We sort of keep planting within the other planters, maybe increase the amount of planting, make it feel a little bit less like just bedding, but something a little bit more intentional. And you know, we would want to explore in greater depth what that actual kind of object with the names of the victims inscribed on it would be, but potentially opportunity with that object, also with the trees, to bring light into the space so that, you know, during the day 7 trees have that symbolism, but at night that's really kind of, that symbolism becomes kind of illuminated in a sense.
And you had said that the trees would maybe reflect the maples that were planted.
Yes, it would.
in Rose Garden.
That's
So
right,
be
yeah.
a similar
Yep.
plant material.
Yeah, so if I go back, you can see the diagram in the bottom left shows where the remembrance niches are. Those are sort of the 7 openings in the tree line where a tree is kind of missing from that line in order to make space for the niche. And 7 of the same trees would end up back in this plaza space. So the second concept is a little bit, you know, it's a little bit kitschy, but it was sort of based on kind of the warmth and love that we sort of perceived in a lot of the photos we saw of how people reacted in the wake of the tragedy, things that people wrote on notes, the sort of temporary memorials that popped up. And so it sort of fills that space, a place for people to write caring messages and leave those. This object would, again, have narrative inscribed on it. It would have the names of the 7 victims inscribed on it, and it would allow people to take a moment to just sit, think, write, and engage. And then the final concept, again, sees an 8th one of these rose petals find its way into Port Clinton. And while the 7 in the Rose Garden site would not have specific names inscribed on them, we imagine that this 8th one might have all 7 names inscribed around the outside. And then perhaps introducing a furniture or bench element in close proximity to that so that people can come sit, reflect. The materials of that would also sort of tie back to the Rose Garden site. And all of these, you'll notice we kind of located in the Grove, the upper area. That was both a sort of practical idea that, you know, this is space that can't be kind of occupied by a large crowd. It does not get sort of populated for events in the same way that the lower plaza does. But there's also, more importantly, kind of an honorific standpoint of saying, hey, this is the elevated space within the plaza. We're holding this in high regard. This is kind of an important moment. Let's lift it up. Yeah, I'll go back to the 3. These are better seen through the views too, so than the plan, so I'm happy to skip around each concept.
And we do this holiday lighting ceremony. What would be the role of the 7 trees? Would they not be lit in memorial? Would they be lit? What, is that just a decision that needs to be made?
I think that's probably a decision that needs to be made. It's also something that we could explore in greater nuance with WSP, who's going to be doing the lighting design. And while we're okay for high-level concepts about lighting, they're really poetic and thoughtful about that in a way that,
Okay.
you know, so I think for,
So maybe a different treatment if there is lighting
yeah,
for them compared to
what's around
everything
it.
else.
But yeah, potentially, yeah.
To highlight that.
And WSP will be engaging more once we have sort of a sense of the direction this is going. They'll be coming in from both a sort of civil infrastructural standpoint, but also from a lighting design. So our hope is that June 8th, we will, in addition to having things like images of the site in all seasons, we'll have some images of the site with lighting at night too.
Thank you. I have to say, I like number one again. I think it's respectful. I think it ties the two spaces together in a way that's thoughtful. Number two just doesn't make sense to me, to be honest with you. It's an interesting idea. And again, I've already said ixnay to 3, so I think 1 really kind of achieves what we're trying to achieve, but looking forward to hearing from everybody else. Andres, I'm gonna call on you first, because you were last time. Are you there? Okay, while we're waiting for Andres, we'll go to Yumi. No, John, sorry. John was second to last.
Oh,
Sorry.
Thank you.
Hold on, hold on.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
I'm going back and forth between my laptop and the phone just to count. You know, I'm really struggling with this concept completely on all 3. You know, where, you know, Port Clinton, you know, we struggle sometimes as the leadership team of kind of piecemealing certain things when we need to be more holistic. And Port Clinton, aside from the remembrance, just aside from it, has needed a re-lifting, a redesign for a very long time. We've talked about it. And so here, I feel that we are grafting on to an old 1980s, whatever year that was, design that really is outdated and really needs to be redone for its own sake because of all the vibrancy things that are important and all that we're trying to do. And so I'm really struggling with grafting this on something that is just an outdated thing that we need to address. I would rather, and I know this kind of messes up timing a big time, but I'd rather us really have a bigger conversation about what should Port Clinton be comprehensive. It's at the center of the city, and then within that, this tragedy and this remembrance and this resilience message should be part of it. But I think we need to really look at the whole Port Clinton thing as a holistic thing, and this is one of the requirements that we need to address. So I don't want to comment on any of the things because I think it's just a misguided approach overall.
Thank you for that. Okay, John?
Councilmember Tapia stole my thunder. I agree 100%. We've talked over the past year about broader plans to modernize and revitalize Port Clinton, and I think we've been making a massive mistake to make a definitive decision around this memorial without thinking through the broader implications of what needs to be an updated Port Clinton. I also think if we think about the participants who have expressed their desire to have a memorial here, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the data suggested that the next of kin and those who were kind of most directly impacted were the ones who really wanted something here. And I'm not sure any of these sort of pay the appropriate respect to what those people want. And so for those 2 reasons, I think we need to pump the brakes on this part of it, understanding that it has implications for the broader project, but we have to get this right, not just based on some timeline that we think we want to get it done by.
So, I hear what you both are saying. I can just tell you that we've talked about redoing Port Clinton Square since 2009. And great idea, but I don't see it in the CIP for the next 10 years. And I urge you to maybe think about, maybe this isn't a permanent thing, but to say, hang on, we're gonna redo Port Clinton Square when A, this group hasn't talked about it, B, it's not in any 10-year capital improvement plan. I worry that it's gonna be 10 years before anything happens in Port Clinton to reflect this tragedy. And I urge you guys to maybe take a step back from that line of thinking. It's a great idea. Be efficient with tax dollars, but let's be realistic. There is zero plan right now to redo Port Clinton. It is a ton of money. And I feel, as I look into the audience and see 2 people who were directly impacted by this tragedy and several more who were also directly impacted, I don't think this is the way you guys want to proceed.
Yeah, I respectfully disagree. We had a meeting last year during, we're about to have another one, right? Where multiple members of council put it on our whiteboard of it being a priority, and it hasn't been brought up back to our attention. So here we are again. We're about to have the same discussion next week. Let's bring it up again, and let's get it on our 10-year CIP plan. And I think what's a better solution than what's a better response, I should say, to what happened than changing the way that whole place looks, right? And showing our vitality and showing the resilience and the response versus just throwing something there and letting it be what it has been historically.
Gita would like to chime in. Go ahead.
Thank you for that feedback, and certainly we're documenting everyone's feedback because this is important as part of, the public engagement and the feedback from the elected officials. So as it relates to the Port Clinton redevelopment, we did talk about revisiting Port Clinton for a possible redevelopment, but we wanted to kind of wait to see how the downtown events would do from the lot versus relocating them to the location where we close Central. And so that conversation will come back where we have that input from businesses and the public and so forth. So, but as the mayor indicated, it's not on our 10-year CIP, but we do review our budget certainly every year. I guess as it pertains to this, I mean, a policy decision was made pertaining to these two locations. My suggestion is that we do present this to the public as part of the public engagement that we've rolled out. They've already seen part of this if they're, we have people here and we've been presenting publicly. So let's get everyone's feedback as part of this. We have a special meeting with the city council on June 8th to come back with the public feedback that we've received to date, and then we can have another policy decision at that point in terms of what would be the appropriate next step for this location.
Okay. Yumi?
Thank you. I hear you. I am just going to add my voice because this is not stealing my thunder. I just happen to agree with the point. We can certainly discuss this further, but I think it's a mistake not to consider the refurbishing, redesign of Port Clinton Square as a separate project from this one. I mean, at worst case, I just see us having to redo the memorial portion because we've got a bigger, also have, plans for Port Clinton Square. Nobody wants to waste money. And I, to the point about timeline, I feel so strongly that I don't want a too aggressive timeline for the unveiling of the memorial. I think good design takes time to develop, to massage, and we owe it to the community not to be rushing through this. I'm not saying take forever on this, but give it its due time and consideration and thoughtfulness. To the point about the trees, I've mentioned this before. I don't love that, it is what it is. We have lights up year round. There are other cities that take the lights down. I feel like we're strangling the trees, so I'd rather have up lights. I'd rather than wrap any trees in lights. And I did want to say could you put up the slide for the last, the one with the Yoko Ono? I did that one with the lotus, the leaves, the individual leaves that form this lotus. I appreciate the Yoko Ono reference there. I know this was brought to your attention by myself, by one of the victims' families, And it is, the piece about it that I like, I'm not sure that we're gonna do any of that, but I have a personal connection to it in full transparency, because I was on the team that installed that in Jackson Park, and it is in full view of the new Obama Center. And that in that case, and I brought this up at the very first committee of the whole meeting that we had when we talked about how we were going to approach the design in two different locations, Yoko Ono took one of those leaves or made an extra leaf and put it at the Art Institute in the Pritzker Garden, and she used the Japanese kintsugi approach of mended, something broken that's mended, and you see the mended lines of that reconstruct the leaf. It's a Japanese tradition that something broken, mended in this method is stronger and more resilient than what, than the original. And I did like that symbolism. But in this case, the leaves are more upright, not which would certainly address any issue of bonking your head on it. But anyway, I appreciate the reference. I'm not sure they'll make it into any of the iterations, but it's an interesting idea, and certainly I do like the idea of carrying an actual piece to Portland Square. Thank you.
Thank you. And we would do that with the trees as well. Marissa?
So I was actually gonna, like this was mentioned before, but when I was going through and thinking about this, as I had mentioned previously, like some type of urban play space in Port Clinton, I got to thinking, what if we change it to not an urban play space, but something to make reference to with the memorial as a secondary. I don't know what that looks like, but maybe to help with, we'd mentioned to bring life and children and just more energy back into Port Clinton as well. I don't know what that would look like. That was just an idea I had as I was looking through and reading the documents, and I know that we've talked about some type of something there for children, and somehow to kind of tie that into it's not on here as one of the ideas, but just an idea that I kind of came across in my mind. That's kind of where my head was. If not, I would say the trees, because the idea of redeveloping Port Clinton that we spoke about, that wouldn't, we would have room to also come up with some other ideas in terms of Port Clinton. So that's kind of where I was. I know I've mentioned this for the on and off for a year, the play space. So I thought, maybe that's something for the secondary we could tie in somehow. So kind of those are my comments. So
Thank you. Annette?
So I'm very torn, because philosophically I really do agree that it should be part of a comprehensive plan if we're going to at some point spend the money and do Port Clinton actually completely over in whatever iteration we want to do it. On the other hand, I don't see us doing that for a very long time. So I'm going to just give my gut as if we were moving forward, because I think that that's where we are tonight, so we may as well discuss that portion of it. At least in the Jewish religion, trees, Eitz Chaim, are living things, and the fact that those trees would be taken from the Rose Garden and you'd have the open space there, and those trees are actually then in Port Clinton, I think is a beautiful connection in terms of life and meaning. And so symbolically, I really love this idea of 7 trees. I do not like the idea of all names on one. I would really want each tree to represent each life that we lost there, because I think for many of the people, and again, I don't know how private, it won't be private, but that's Port Clinton and that's where it happened. And so maybe that openness of it with a symbol that is of life, in many ways I think is very touching, and I like that idea. I will say the lighting actually really presents us with a wonderful opportunity, and that is that many people don't like the trees being lit all year like we have right now. And so I think maybe in the holiday season, we could light the trees, but during the year, the only ones that would be uplit would be the 7. And in some ways, that would really be paying homage every single night and giving it a more respectful and bigger place. At a time when it isn't as much in people's mind's eye, but this way it could be the kind of thing. I mean, I love this, not the ones with the glitter on the branches, but the uplighting of the main trunks there to symbolize the remembrance on a nightly basis, and not have the other trees with all the, as my mother would say, ungapach stuff up there. But then during the holiday season, you could do the lighting of all the trees that we have and not light those trees, really to show the loss that we have all felt. So again, I'm philosophically quite torn, frankly, because I don't like planning like this, but I also feel we need to really remember and really, I love this concept, so.
Thank you.
that's all I have.
Tony?
So I want to acknowledge the design challenge that you faced. There is within our community those that see this as a commercial space that they do not want altered and are concerned about having to face their memories of the event, and others who recognize that this is really sort of the place where this event happened, and to that degree it borders on becoming a memorial as opposed to an extension of the place of remembrance. I think you've done a good job, especially with number one, of bridging those needs, of having a place that people can interact with, remember if they were there, remember, and want to recall that, and the people who were directly involved with that, while affording the commercial use of the space. At some point, if we redo Port Clinton, we have to remember that this event happened there. And what we can redo with Port Clinton does not include the buildings. Those buildings are privately owned. They have stores and businesses in them. Whatever we redo to Port Clinton, the shape of Port Clinton is not going to change. And the fact that this event happened there is with us forever. So now is the time to make this decision, in my opinion. I'm most comfortable with number one. I think it needs a little bit of tweaking, but it provides a place of remembrance, an opportunity for solace amid whatever else is going on around it, without being so overwhelming that those who are going to go to the store use the space for its commercial purposes, who have a more troubled connection with the event, don't have to interact with it. And I think it finds that balance.
Thank you. Andres?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to, the dilemma here. There's always dilemmas and there's always paradoxes. And I think when we have something that is somewhat seemingly intractable, to your point there about 10 years or whatever the case may be, yet I think that we do face something very important here. I just wonder if we can push the design team further to try to find something that can at least bridge the gap between a 10-year rebuild and something that it just is an attachment or respectful attachment to what is already there, and it's something that we do really want to do something with. And I think philosophically or just emotionally, this has always been a place of gathering for the community and celebration for many things. And everybody has, even those who grew up here, have all these memories there that are very positive. And then that was one of the great tragedies is the loss of life, but also the heart of symbolically is the heart of the city, the bloodshed. And so I get to achieve kind of two things: the remembrance of those who lost and injured and the trauma, and at the same time, we want to not have this place so marked by that moment that the place of celebration at the heart of the city, that it's meant so much that we kind of get trapped in that. In one way, to just kind of come out of it is, can we come out in a more evolved and modern and vibrant Port Clinton, while at the same time remembering those who we lost. And while the ambition behind it, let's redo the whole Port Clinton to this next 21st century look, can we at least drive something that gets to, out of the tragedy and out of the bloodshed, we came out stronger and more vibrant, and we don't forget, but we also bring our children, to Councilmember Bruckman's point, and we not only remember, but we thrive. I just worry that this, whatever designs are there now, do not communicate thrival. It's a remembrance and a kind of dressing up a little bit more of Port Clinton, but I just don't feel that we are coming out of this kind of the phoenix rising, a community that continues to rise and thrive without forgetting. I just feel we're falling short of that, even if we don't redo all of Port Clinton right away.
So thank you for your comments. This team needs to be elsewhere at 6:30 for community engagement. So I'm gonna ask you to, 30 seconds?
30 seconds, sign
30
it, sign it.
seconds.
All right, you and then you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I mean, I'll just say that if we're going to pick a design that has 7 trees in the middle of Port Clinton, we will never do Port Clinton, and I think that's a huge problem.
I don't know that that's the case, but,
We won't do it right.
no, because well, we can move the trees and come back and whatever, but, okay, you meet 30 seconds, then we gotta wrap.
I feel that it has become, in many ways a sacred place for, and still are the heart of the city. And I think that it is honoring the 7 victims and what happened in Highland Park to add that piece to it, to reimagine Portland Square in a fuller way.
Okay. There's a lot more to discuss about this aspect, and I appreciate everybody's thoughtful input, and I don't mean to rush us, but I do recognize that you need to go engage with the community in 15 minutes in a different location. So I just want to, again, say thank you for what you've presented this evening. We will be back discussing this again June 8th. So keep your thoughts and analyses and bring us more questions, and we will have more thoughtful conversation on these decisions. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
And, hopefully June 8th, what we bring will reflect a lot of what was discussed here today. So,
Absolutely. Thank you
thank
so
you so much
much.
for your time.
We're going to take a 5-minute recess.
Great.
And then we will be, can you get past back for committee of the whole? Thank you.
No, seriously.
Yes, thank you.
I knew it was the same thing, but I won't take it back.
Before we continue on with our scheduled business, I need a motion to approve the minutes from our committee of the whole meeting, April 27th, 26th.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, thank you. The minutes are approved. Our next item is a policy discussion pertaining to the possible advancement of term limits. Gita, Megan, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. This policy discussion was brought forward by one elected officials, and based on one-on-one communication with all of our elected officials, there were a majority of individuals that requested a policy discussion at a committee of the whole meeting. So working with Corporation Counsel, we did municipal research, we have staff information in the packet, and then a memorandum from Corporation Counsel as it pertains to this topic. Very important for this group is that if term limits are advanced, they would not take effect for the terms that you are currently serving. They don't go retroactively backwards, it's only forwards. So just want to make sure that's clear as it pertains to the policy discussion and feedback. For public information, elected officials are elected to 4-year terms, and we have staggered elections. So it is very rare, in fact, I don't know a time where we would have all elected officials either being appointed or on a ballot at one time period. So it works well in terms of consistent policy moving forward. I'm going to turn it over to Megan Cherry, who will guide us through the presentation, and then we'll open it up to policy discussion.
Sounds good, thank you.
All right. So, as City Manager Newkirk mentioned, per Illinois law, term limits cannot be retroactive. They can only be prospective, so that's something to keep in mind throughout this conversation. City staff did direct Corporation Counsel to author a memorandum that outlines the city's legal obligations as it pertains to term limits. So, for any change to a home rule municipality's term limits, those have to be approved by referendum. And so that referendum can be initiated by the city council or voters. So if the city council wanted to initiate that, they would have to adopt a resolution or ordinance. And then if the voters wanted to initiate a referendum, that would be done through filing a written petition with the city clerk. So those are kind of the two options. The deadline to include a referendum on the ballot depends on who actually initiates the referendum. And so this might be a little bit hard to read, but it is in the memorandum that's included in the agenda packet. But this chart outlines the important dates as it pertains to getting a referendum on the ballot. And so this outlines the deadlines for the November 3rd, 2026 general election, along with the April 6th, 2027 consolidated election. And so for the city council to have a referendum on the November 3rd, 2026 ballot, you'd be looking to approve or adopt a resolution or ordinance by August 16th of this year. And then if we're looking at the April 6, 2027 consolidated election, that deadline would be January 17th of 2027. This also includes the important deadlines for a voter-initiated referendum as well. So as part of the preparation for this conversation, we did reach out to 17 neighboring communities regarding term limits. 15 of them responded. So of those 15, 4 have informal term limits and 4 have formal term limits, and the rest don't have any term limits whatsoever. So Skokie most recently implemented term limits. That was in 2024, and that was initiated by the village board. Yes.
Just a quickie, I know personally that Winnetka should be in the middle
That's what I was
column.
just gonna say.
They
Thank
are
you.
informal.
Thank you.
They may not have responded that way to the survey, but I know that it is informal.
Gotcha. So 5 have informal term limits.
I caught that too.
Oh.
So as I mentioned, Skokie was the most recent. I know Des Plaines recently amended their term limits in 2023. And then in terms of informal term limits, a majority of the communities that have informal term limits, those are actually determined by their caucus. So that's kind of something to keep in mind as you're reviewing this information. We also want to note that the city did reach out to the League of Women Voters to understand their stance on this topic. So the League of Women Voters of Illinois opposes any term limits for members of the General Assembly. The Highland Park Highwood chapter of the League of Women Voters has not taken a position on this subject. So just something to note. So we did kind of put together some items that you might want to consider as you have this discussion. So is council interested in pursuing a referendum to establish term limits? If the council initiates the referendum, should it be on the November 3rd, 2026 election or the April 6th, 2027 election? What term limit should be considered? Should the term limit policy take account for non-consecutive terms? And should the term...
I'd take off that last bullet.
All right. Well, then those are...
Because it can only be prospective.
Right.
Los Angeles?
Los Angeles.
Okay,
So that's the information that we put together. So I will hand it back over to you guys to discuss.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think it's important to reiterate that this is more a question of what's best for the community. Obviously, it doesn't impact any of the people sitting around this table at the moment. And we should figure out what structure best serves Highland Park over the long term. I appreciate what the League of Women Voters has to say, which is essentially you leave it to the voters. And to have an arbitrary deadline, we know from the research, might make it harder for people to represent the community. They're more dependent, as I understand it, on staff, not to diminish staff, you guys are awesome, but consultants, and yeah, I'm just open to hearing what people have to say. I personally believe voter choice is probably the most important thing, one of the most important democratic principles that we can uphold. But clearly there's a question about term limits. I appreciate Skokie. Was George Van Dusen in office for 40 years? Or 44? It's quite a while. So, yeah, but I believe in our voters. So curious to hear what others have to say. Councilmember Middleware.
So I have always philosophically believed in term limits for many, many years, and I think it's a really wonderful step that we could take. It does not reflect on the fact that we haven't had good leadership. I do think it's a wonderful way to let the voters decide and to bring new leadership and energy more openly into the process. And what I mean by that is the following. We are going to leave it to the voters if we bring this to referendum, because the voters will either say we do want term limits or they don't. It's a restriction like any other restriction. You have to be 18 years old to vote. So to me, it's just one more restriction, assuming voters go forward with it or they don't. I would love to see, and I think we have a wonderful process in place already, whereby we have advisory groups and we have commissions and we appoint people and they spend 2 years, 4 years, and we have limits on how long they can serve in those positions because we want to rotate additional people into those appointments. And that's a great feeding ground from which, and I know you're not supposed to use the word feeding, but it's a great sender principle where when someone already is somewhat familiar with the city's government by serving on a commission or an advisory group, they then might be interested in running for city council. And I think it's wonderful, the interaction, for example, we had this year with the Historic Preservation Commission directly. So it's that kind of a thing where we want to include more and more people. And I think, and it's no one's fault, but incumbency is daunting. If we've run for office before, we know what it takes in terms of raising money, how much energy it takes, going through lists, doing it for the first time. Getting someone's name out there is very difficult. And it's a credit to our current elected officials of how much energy I've seen all of us put into this type of process, and on other boards. But I think we should be leaders in our town, and I think that we should leave it to the voters to decide. I think that there's a name recognition advantage, a fundraising advantage. It's institutional visibility that we receive every single...
Shouldn't we wait until that?
He wanted to be part of the conversation.
So,
Try again.
You know what, maybe we just call him on your cell phone and just let him.
do you have it on WhatsApp? Do you have WhatsApp to call him? Because it may not go through if you don't. I mean, he's out of the country. Yeah.
It worked before.
He called before. Right?
Yeah, we called him.
That's good, that's a good sign.
Yeah, that's the right way.
Okay, I'm on.
Okay, great. All right, I'm
Can you hear
gonna,
me?
yeah,
Yes.
so I'm gonna pick up with some of the
Can you hear me,
points.
Edith?
Yep, we can hear you.
I don't know if you can hear us, Andres, but Councilmember, we are, I'm going through a couple of points that I think are really important. And, you know, I don't like the idea necessarily of limiting someone, but I think the way to get people realistically to participate is to give them the opportunity to plan, to know when there will be vacancies, to know that they may have an option of running against someone who's truly their peer, rather than having served for so many years that it's difficult to overcome that advantage. And so in the hopes of getting more people involved, more families and people who haven't yet been a part of this, I think that's some of the issues for bringing them on. Experienced officials, I would like to see people run for another office, get to know it. I don't want to lose the institutional memory we've had. I really would like to see people after they serve coming back, whether that's in an advisory capacity or serving on a board or serving in a different office. Because the way I envision this, I think we do need to develop our bench. I think it takes a couple of years to get up and running. And so obviously, unlike some of the communities that have 2-year terms and limited then to 2 terms at 2 years, which
Lake
is only
Forest, holy
4
moly.
years that you can serve, it takes, I really think between Open Meetings Act and Illinois parameters and constitutionality and knowing our structure in terms of advisory groups, I would be very much in favor of 2 full terms plus any partial appointment, and that would be separate and apart for the office of mayor, because in fact, which would, in theory, someone could serve for 20 years, because they would have, in theory, 10 years if they were appointed to a position to fill a term, and then 2 full terms as a council member, actually it would be, I'm sorry, 18. And then 2 full years as a mayor, in theory. And I don't think being on one, we should bar the other office. I think they should really not feed off again, but be a part of it all. I think there's some things to consider in terms of a break in service, but actually I think that that's a long time. And so that would be what I would be thinking in terms of terms.
So if there were a break in service, it would not restart the clock, or is it a cumulative? Like if you think about Dan Pierce and Rage Racing, both
Right,
had,
going
like,
back and forth.
breaks.
Right.
That's a policy question. You could do it either way.
And
Okay.
I'm
And I'm
advocating
just
for
curious to know
further
where-
discussion.
Oh,
I think that, frankly, feeling like we had 10 as city council and then in theory 8, I think that's sufficient. But if someone didn't do the full 4 and 4 or whatever, I think it's something to take into account. I think that eligibility rules for government, well, excuse me for 1 minute. We have procedural rules and qualifications, and I think that this is just one more of those. Additionally, elected office belongs to the public. I don't view this as a job. I view it as public service. And I think in order to get more people into public service and knowing that it's temporary, we will also garner additional interest. And I think it strengthens an institution to rotate through And so, Mayor, to your point about a break, that's why I think that should be further discussed. But I don't think that government should become totally dependent on one or one group of officials. I think it's better to have a deeper bench and to bring people up and train them. It cultivates future leaders. It avoids a concentration of influence by one group. I like policy statements by the League of Women Voters and other governmental groups, but many of the groups that I looked at, including the Paul Simon Institute, they really have very strong position statements in favor of term limits. I think that fresh perspectives, newer perspectives will improve our governance here. And every type of leadership structure benefits from renewal. Incumbents are reelected at very high rates. But the statistics that I looked at with regard to these types of referenda showed that passage of 50% of those 20, I believe, that started back in 2014, 50% of those passed by over 80% from the public, and the other 50% passed by over 60% by the public. And so in these times, I think it's important for us to know what the public is sensing, and to start looking at oversight and transparency and recruitment of newer Highland Parkers. I think we've had a huge influx of people, and I think we lead by example, and that's why I think it's very important for us as a group to put this on the ballot rather than asking another group to do it. I think and then we can see, I also think it's very important that we do it for this August so that it's on the November ballot. Number one, more people will vote in November. And number two, I don't want it to coincide with when we are up for re-election. I think that's unfair to those of us, and I'm not, but to many who are up for re-election. And I don't think that they should have to face that as an obstacle at the time.
It'll be a question
And so.
when they run.
That's right.
Do you support this? Do you not support this?
Right.
It'll be part of their debate.
But that's why I think by doing it in November, it doesn't at all overlap with our city council elections. And that's I think it gives everybody the best benefit of that. And it also shows other boards and elected officials that we take this very seriously. I know there are several individuals on school boards right now who are watching very closely what we do because they want to institute something similar. And I know that the Park District has some of those commissioners. And Illinois having as many bodies as we do, and certainly Highland Park, I think we lead by example. And so it's one of the reasons that I support this as an initiative, as a referendum, initiated by the City Council for the November election with limits, getting the work done by August in order to do that. And I do think that those limits, but in terms of 2 full terms plus any partial term under the 25 months, which is the language I think they used in Lake Zurich and in a couple of other places, should be what we really take. I will say that Skokie did it with the 3 terms. They didn't even have staggered terms. So I think they were facing a very different thing. Highland Park, I think, is in a much better place. We have staggered terms already there. So it's not like we're gonna lose half of our institutional memory. We're not gonna lose it anyhow because we're starting at 0 if this passes. But even with that, I think we're still in a much further ahead place than Skokie was. But I do want to see us consider this as a council so we can lead for our community. And it's really meant in a very positive light to just help others get in there too.
Would you want the resolution to, and I don't know if we can do this, include the school boards and include the Park District? Can we put a resolution on recommending term limits for all local governments, if
The
that's
city.
something?
The city council cannot, it would be
Only
only for
yourself.
our
Ourselves.
government. Residents can, there would be there could be a resident petition, but not, we
Not the
govern
city
ourselves.
council.
And I would not be in favor of that, Mayor, and the reason is that I think I'd like to start with us as the leaders in the council, and then if other governmental bodies want to seek out the similar expertise and drafting, then it's there, and they have a model, should they choose to follow it.
Tony?
I think my feelings about term limits have been expressed publicly, both informally. I know that I've made comments on social media, so it won't be a secret that I generally don't favor term limits. And the reason I don't favor term limits are really for the reasons you just raised, which is the value of having a deep bench of people taking the time to be on commissions, to understanding how our government works, to getting to know the people involved in government, preparing themselves for the process of being on city council, and then once you get on city council, there's a learning curve. As a person who has not had a terrible challenge trying to get reelected over the years, and some years being completely unopposed, I've never had to spend a lot of money. But I'm also aware that if you put term limits out there, you do exactly what you have previously advocated against. You limit the choice of residents. And as you aptly pointed out, these jobs are proprietarily our residents. They should get to choose who they want to represent them. This is a representative government. We're here to make policy. It's taken a long time, I think, for all of us to learn how things operate and to become more efficient at it. And I think although I did not contemplate serving more than 2 years when I started out.
2 terms.
2 terms when I started out, I was actually persuaded to run for a 3rd term by people who are very much in favor of term limits. The problem with term limits, and whatever it is you're seeking to fix, it works both ways. You can wind up with somebody representing you who you very much want to stay there, who's doing a great job as far as you're concerned, who suddenly can't serve anymore. Preceding me were council members who had been on our city council for very long periods of time. I think Steve Mandel had served for more than 20 years, or around 20 years. 16. Jim Kirsch had been here for a long time, and I will say that without Jim on the city council, it would have been much harder to find my footing. And to have somebody like that around for a long time who really understood how things operated was very important. Mike Brenner was on for a very, very long time and was very reliable as a representative of the community, and I think it would be terrible not to have that, as a city council, to have that kind of stability. You also run the risk of creating lame ducks in your council members who have reached the end of their term limits, and I would hate to see that happen. So while I understand the argument that maybe it's hard to run for office against an incumbent, we had an election recently where 5 or 6 people ran for council and a number of incumbents were not reelected. So it's not that daunting, at least from my perception. I've not made any extraordinary effort to try to stay on the council. I've run because people have asked me to run. I've made it known that I'm running, and I spend just enough money to let it be known in the community that I'm running. But I haven't aggressively tried to defend my seat. I've certainly done things and voted in ways that I'm sure make people unhappy. We all have. And there are people who have run for city council because they're motivated by that, and I think that's a great motivation. So for all those reasons, I'm really not in favor of term limits. In terms of how and when to do a referendum, I don't want to weigh in on that. I think the question of whether to have a referendum or not is a different question.
I think it is the question.
I guess it is. I would
Yes.
prefer, I guess if it is that urgent, I would rather see that come from the public.
That's an interesting point, thank you. Thank you for sort of highlighting the history of who's been here. As somebody who ran against Mike Brenner 20 years, Steve Mandel 16 years, Jim Kirsch 12 years and came in first place, I know how hard it is to run against three incumbents
Yeah.
whose race is being run by the mayor. But here I am. I made it onto the council and then made it into the mayor's seat. I think one of the things that we're not talking about is, unfortunately, the piece about seniority beyond the city council. So this city is a member of a council of governments called the Northwest Municipal Conference. They are our voice along with 42 other communities in Springfield and to some extent in Washington. That group then participates in something called the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus and the Illinois Municipal League. These are all organizations that have been fighting for us about different bills, bringing all that information that we've heard about in terms of the BUILD Act, in terms of e-bikes. And what's interesting is little old Highland Park, because we were involved with those organizations, was able to provide L. Rod Friedman's great, well-written law about e-bikes that then became, I think, the foundation for what the state is now talking about. Without seniority, people can't really participate meaningfully in those councils of government, in that municipal league. It's very hard. And believe me, I look at some of these folks who have been on there for a long, long time, and I think, there's nobody else in your community who can run and represent. But I just share that because I think it's a little bit more of a shadow issue that may not be out there. Look, it's been my privilege and my honor to serve this community, always. And it's where I grew up, so it's my joy to be here. But I agree with you, Tony. I just believe strongly in elections. I believe strongly in voters' choice. I think having an arbitrary deadline given, and this is gonna sound insane, but how many years did it take us to get the sidewalk built on Sheridan Road? 13, 14 years? I just shared with you earlier when we were talking about the place of remembrance that we've been talking about changing Port Clinton since 2009. Solo Cup, 2009. There are glacial paces that apply sometimes that I think are helpful. And I know that you yourself value having been on the school board for, was it 8 years, and then as school board president, and now on city council. So, serving an elected office for
8 years each time,
so
each office.
2 decades essentially at this point. I do raise one concern, and that is in the last municipal election, it was uncontested. So I hope there's a group of people interested in running, and there's a whole other conversation that maybe hasn't been brought up today about wards and making sure that we have geographic representation. So I just think there are a lot of challenges before us in terms of what's best for the community is representation. What's best for the community are people who bring context and understanding and again, appreciate the service of many people here on commissions prior to running for city council. I'm gonna call him Brissa and then I'll call him John.
Okay. Thank you.
And you mean, thank you.
So my first point was actually gonna be the election that we ran in last year, that we were unopposed. So that was my first thought. But, I mean, as we've started talking about this, I have seen that the community now is interested in this topic. I saw there was a social media post, so people are interested in what we're doing here. A lot of my comments have already been mentioned that I'm concerned about the institutional knowledge that we might lose. And we need to be sure that the Fresh Start term limits don't provide, doesn't come at a cost of the expertise that we need to run our city. And since it could be a concern, and Then I look at Skokie, for example, and I actually had a question for staff on Skokie and other home rule communities. Have we seen data on how these limits have impacted the bench of candidates? Are there more people interested in running, or do we have that information?
It's a new,
Skokie,
just did it.
yeah, I can, as
Skokie,
Skokie's attorney, I can answer that. Skokie just adopted in this last election last year the term limit, and they also adopted wards, and they adopted ranked choice voting. So they did three things in this past election. The fruits of that labor are still remain to be seen.
Okay, so that was just, I was curious on that, whether the term limits brought more people out to vote, like, to run for office, or had the opposite effect, that they weren't seeing much. So that was one question I had. And then also, I mean, it's been mentioned, you know, elections are the most direct form of term limits, in my opinion, which has been mentioned. And that's definitely a change, a mindset change for the voters in Highland Park moving forward if we do put in term limits. But then again, I know that the community does seem interested in this, but if we were to do term limits, I would be more in favor of 12 years, because I think you need to be at, you need more than 8 years. Personally, I'm not in favor of term limits, but that's kind of where I'm at, though. So that's my thoughts.
Great, thank you. John?
Thank you. So first of all, I'll sort of start with my conclusion and then give some thoughts behind it. I do think we should initiate this referendum, and we should do it sooner rather than later. I agree with Councilmember Littleworth's point about it being on the November ballot is important, so that it is not intermixed with any of this group needing to rerun for office, and with voter turnout getting the most input possible. We know that historically more people voted in November than the April election. I think we operate in a broken system that inherently creates barriers to entry for positions of power, and that's not by accident. And right, so we look at a list of government agencies, it's no surprise that only 5 of them have term limits, because everybody wants to protect themselves in their seats of power. So I think we need to be leaders in this regard. I don't care what other communities are doing. I think it's not surprising that they're not on that list. And so we should be more proactive in this regard, and hopefully others will follow. Every good organization has leadership changes. I've sat on boards with term limits. Ideas get stale, leaders get complacent. That is just the nature of operations. Appropriate change management, effective transition planning needs to be put in place to de-risk the institutional handoff risk, right? Yes, that's part of it, but if you plan for it, you can appropriately ensure that that doesn't become a problem moving forward. With respect to expediency of getting things done, I actually think with term limits, we maybe have more incentive to get things done more quickly, and you're not gonna, it kind of goes back into the complacency thing.
Oh, John, we move as fast as humanly possible here in the city of Highland Park.
So, I can't read most of my writing, but I think, let me just make sure I got everything. Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of covers it, right? I think you can argue on both sides of this for sure. I heard what you guys said about that side of the table. I think about my personal experience in serving in organizations and advising organizations, both not-for-profit and for-profit organizations, and all good ones have leadership changes, all good ones have term limits for their boards. I don't think we should be any different.
Okay, Yumi?
Thank you. I want to share that having worked super hard, each time harder than the last time to get elected to this office, and finally won a seat just 3 years ago, term limits was not on my radar at this moment in time. And I also want to say that, you know, I've lived here for 28 years. I've been incredibly involved here, serving in a lot of different ways. was finally able to prevail, but I didn't have the elementary, middle, and high school classmates that knew me, and I think it's just harder for anyone who didn't grow up here. But as when one of our council colleagues proposed it, my first thought really was that I have long believed in term limits generally, so how could I speak against them simply because it applied to me? I can't just accept myself from this. Nobody should have a lifetime position in government, in my opinion. In the private sector, nonprofits, I think it is different, actually. I think I disagree a little bit there, that I think nonprofits really depend on, longer serving members. But unless there is an opening on council, and I have deep experience with this, people don't even bother to run. The power of incumbency is considered insurmountable for many. I will say, as far as training goes, we've had members of council who have been served on commissions or advisory groups. This office is open to anyone who wishes, to run, obviously. And I've seen a lot in our community in terms of service, and from what I saw on District 112 School Board, there can be big transitions, such as, for example, a new superintendent, new leader of a governmental body, or a major referendum that transforms a district. And I saw that superintendents and tend to prefer to work with elected officials who they have strong working relationships with and know the institution well, which is why I believe we should give strong consideration to 3 terms. I'm not wedded to that, but I understand that that's not the point tonight, right? Is not whether it's 2 terms or 3 terms. It's just why I believe that, that also, besides the institutional knowledge, there's I think not just of myself, or not of myself really, but of current and future council members who might be in their 30s, as well as old colleagues who ran for 3rd terms primarily to support the institution at a time of huge change and transformation. And we have, I think, it seems like we have a choice tonight of whether term limits is something we as a council want to advance, or whether a citizens group will advance it. And I would rather, and I would pose the question, wouldn't we rather see council lead on that? I think that it sends a better message to our community. And I honestly believe that a citizens group won't have a problem getting this on the ballot, but I still think that it is a better message to our community that we don't consider ourselves infallible because we're not infallible. That we understand that there's a shelf life to everybody. And I happen to believe, based on what I hear on the radio and read in the media, that there is growing support for term limits in general, not just in our community, but across the nation. It's a topic of discussion about Supreme Court, the Senate, and the Congress, and I just think it's something that people are interested in.
Okay,
So,
Andres?
Yeah, hi. So, to me, this is an inclusion issue. And when do we call something an inclusion issue? We call it an inclusion issue when we don't see the diversity that reflects our community. And when I mean diversity, I mean everything. Age, generational, experience levels, functional areas, race, ethnicity, gender, religious background, all that, right? And so I always have been in favor of succession and term limits and refreshing leadership for a lot of reasons. One of them is there's a lot of people with a lot of skills and a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different perspectives that do not have a chance to really have a fighting chance, if you will, often, even though you some of you have given examples of, challengers that did win. But in general, you know, when you don't have a diversity of the community reflected, there's something systemic going on. Not in a malevolent way at all, but systems get put in place for a reason, but then they get calcified and they kind of favor those that have benefited from it for whatever different reasons. And then to challenge those already in power, which is the incumbents, the power incumbency is a very real structural systemic thing. And term limits is a structural way to address the downside of structure that has to be there, but sometimes it just reinforces, you know, the lack of change, the lack of fresh ideas, the lack of new voices, and all that. So we don't have as much diversity on the city council as we should, given the kind of city we are. And I'm talking, like I said, diversity in every possible different ways. And I believe that term limits would be a systematic, structural way to clear the way on a regular basis for new voices to come in, and to, at some points already been made, you know, if you want to, the deck seems very stacked against you just because you don't have the power coming to you, you don't have the financial support, you don't have, you know, the networks that an incumbent does develop appropriately. Then it just feels like, well, it's just too hard. You know, why should I go for it? But if there's a kind of a refresh, a reboot, and if people have a chance to say, hey, you know what, the deck is clear, I can compete head to head with those that haven't been entrenched in it for so long, I think that's a very good thing, and I think it's reflective of Highland Park's, you know, commitment to inclusion, diversity, and equity, and this is the main reason why I would be in favor of it. And, you know, we see that term limits exist on boards, term limits exist in regular elected positions, and even in appointments, not all of them. And lately, in the last decade, we have seen the problem with the lack of succession and the lack of moving on and lack of fresh blood. And the other thing about having term limits, it would force those of us who are in elected office, who are hitting the term limit, to really, rather than focus on our power and our continuity, for us to look at mentoring and sponsoring the next generation of leaders. And I can't think of a better way to have impact that is legacy, based on one's own ideas and policies and contributions, to rather than feel that we have to carry the torch of that, to really nurture the next generation that can carry it in a fresh way, in a next generation way, in a diverse way, and for a longer period of time. So I think that fundamentally, structurally, you know, term limits is an inclusion response to our desire to be more diverse and reflective of the community that we represent. So I'm in favor of this.
Thank you for making that assertion. I'm sort of laughing because if you look in the hallway at the pictures of the city council, when I became mayor, I am surrounded by 6 men. And so I just want to share with you that we are now 50-50 women, men on the council. I hate to call people out by their identities, but 2 are people of color. At least 2 have disabilities that I'm aware of, and I think that inclusion has been a wonderful part of the colleagues that I've been serving with. So having come on when there was what I derisively called the chick seat, there was 1 woman regularly on this council. I became the 2nd woman on this council and then became mayor with 6 men. I think inclusion has already been at the forefront of how we've recruited and supported and built the bench and put people on commissions and really made that a priority. And we continue to do that with our commissions as well. That's not a free-for-all. That is an absolute value that we really pursue when we're putting people on our commissions. That being said, I think it's also important to note that there have been a lot of assertions made this evening, but specifically there are term limits in fewer than 85% of municipalities in this country. So, yep, you can be at the forefront of a new trend, but as far as smaller cities and municipal governments, term limits are unusual. That being said, my sense is that the majority of this group is seeking to have a resolution for a referendum on term limits November 3rd, on the November 3rd, 2026 ballot. So what I see is, and what I'm hearing is 4 people are in favor, 3 people are not in favor necessarily. This isn't an actual action, this is a request. And so my sense, Steve, is that we want to have a resolution in an upcoming meeting where people will be voting to put a referendum on the November 3rd, 2026 ballot. Tony?
So does that referendum have to specify what kind of term limits we're going to have?
Yeah, so
Yes, it
2
does.
terms or 3 terms? You
And
guys.
how long is it, can we change the?
There are a
length
number
the
of,
term?
if the threshold question has been met, that we want to proceed with the resolution. Now, there,
We'll have another conversation about the specifics, or you want to get those details right now?
whatever, I don't
Well,
know
it's
what
up
your
to
timing
you,
is.
Mayor.
It's
but,
how long you guys want to eat dinner.
We
We
have
can
time,
go-
We
because
have time to get it up.
August is the deadline,
Yeah.
and so we could schedule this for another committee of the whole
And you
to
can
dive
just
into
choose
those
if you want to do
details,
the 2 terms or the 3 terms.
and then we'll put it on an
And
agenda.
I just want to close by saying, as I've said at the beginning, I personally believe that voter choice is one of the most democratic principles we have. The end from Nancy, yes.
I just had 2 quick statements about.
Sure.
First of all, when we think about this for 2 or 3 terms, I think one of the things to take into account, we have a very able city manager and staff. They, in many ways, are the institutional memory of how things work, and we are the policymakers. And sometimes you want more policy change, and so it worries me less to know that I have an institutional memory and a phenomenal staff that has backed up various councils before us. So that's number 1 on it. And that goes to 2 or 3 terms, 2 or 3 terms,
So you
yes.
support two terms?
I support 2 terms plus under 25 months, meaning if someone was
So up to a total of
appointed,
10 years.
yes.
And the mayor is the same?
The mayor, I would think, would probably be 2 terms, but if it's 2 years plus 25, I think it's just.
So you want to be
cleaner.
consistent between the two?
Yes.
Be careful when you say the same, but it's a
It's
separate
different.
office.
Separate
Right,
office.
Right, that's
Separate
what I mean,
office.
same
And
concept.
it would not bar
Both
one
offices,
from
right.
the other. In other words, if someone were a council member for 10 years,
Mhm.
they could then run for mayor.
Mhm.
If someone was the mayor for 10 years, in theory, they could then run for council.
The other issue that needs to be resolved at some point is consecutive versus a total.
Right, do you want cumulative, or do you want consecutive? People
I-
coming and going?
I think it should be cumulative, but that doesn't, let's figure this out for a minute. If it's cumulative, you could do 4 years,
Mhm.
go off the council,
Mhm.
go for another 4,
Mhm.
and then someone could appoint you, because maybe they think of you as the institutional memory. And so it would be over a longer duration, but it would still be a total of 10. Or it could be 4, 4, and 2, so 10 in a row. So
Do you
I
mean John Andres?
think either or.
Yeah,
Cumulative works.
I don't know, that seems kind of complicated. I think, you know, just to keep track, I think it's just consecutive.
Consecutive?
To-
So you could serve 10 years, go off for 2 years, come
And then
back for
come
another
back.
10?
But that's what consecutive, just to make it clear.
Right,
Yeah.
Is that what you mean, Councilmember Tapia?
consecutive versus cumulative.
That means
has
that
to be-
someone could come back and serve another 10 in
Mhm.
theory.
If they take a period.
Okay, I'm cumulative.
Oh.
I'm cumulative.
I agree, I agree.
Oh.
Have you ever
Cumulative.
seen that happen?
You never know.
You never know.
As a lawyer,
Again,
I think
raise
Council-
the-
I
right.
think Councilmember Tapia, you were just, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but were you speaking to Councilmember Litterer's example of potentially taking a break and sort of still having time? You're trying to avoid that from a complexity perspective?
Yeah, what's the complex part?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the term.
You know, maybe, I mean, why don't give staff a chance to kind of now do their research, see what other options are out there, and we can get into some more terms.
I agree. And I'm not ready to commit to the number of terms. Yeah.
We can take it back.
Okay, and then do you want to come back after council to talk about 445 Central, or how do you want to
I
do
can
it?
just do a quick update at the city council meeting.
Okay.
And then,
Sounds good. All right, seeking a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Bye.